Grateful that we could all come together out of our hectic lives and just pause here for a moment and look into your word and hear from you. And I just ask that you would open our hearts to hear from you in Daniel 11. And that we would be just in tune to the work that your Holy Spirit is doing in our lives on a daily basis, and that we would desire to seek you, Lord. I love you. In your name, amen. Okay. So Daniel 11 follows Daniel 10, oddly enough. Boy, we're starting off good.
Joke never gets old.
Yeah, that's right. So Daniel 10, remember, is this angel appears to Daniel, and in response to a fast and prayer that Daniel carries on for 3 weeks. So that's where we are, and really just Daniel 10 is just describing that whole thing, and then finally the angel says, okay, I've got this vision for you, and I'm going to give you this vision. And so we're really picking up on that in the first verse, okay? And so we'll just start here, Daniel 11:1. In the first year, let me do that. Just a second. Alex, can you still hear me?
Check that.
Okay, good. All right. So, and in the first year of Darius the Mede, I arose to be an encouragement and a protection for him. Now, understand that that's the angel speaking. That's not Daniel speaking. So this is the angel speaking to Daniel, telling him what he's doing. And I just find that first verse really fascinating. It says, in the first year of Darius the Mede, I arose to be an encouragement and a protection for him. Darius is certainly not Christian. Christianity wasn't even around. He's not Jewish. He's Persian. And this angel is given a task to be an encouragement and a protection to the angel. Not the angel, but Darius. I just find that really fascinating. And it as I was reading that this afternoon, it caused me to think about 1 Timothy. So I'm going to flip over to 1 Timothy. You don't have to necessarily go there, but I'm going to. But 1 Timothy 2, and this is kind of dovetailing off of our conversation last week about spiritual warfare and the role of prayer in that whole thing. But 1 Timothy 2, I always have a hard time finding 1 Timothy. 1 Timothy 2, Paul says this to Timothy. He says, first of all, then I urge that entreaties and prayers, petitions and thanksgivings be made on behalf of all men, for kings and all who are in authority, in order that we may lead a tranquil and quiet life in all godliness and in dignity. Right, so he encourages Timothy to pray for, at this time it would have been, the king would have been Caesar, and I think it was Nero, who was going to launch one of the greatest persecutions in the Christian church ever known, and certainly that had ever been known up to that time. And he encourages Timothy and the congregation that Timothy's overseeing to be praying for the kings and those who are in authority, that we may lead a tranquil and quiet life. I just find it interesting because now we come back here into Daniel 11:1, and we see Darius the Mede as this angel tasked to him to be an encouragement and a protection for him. Okay, and Darius was truly in charge of really the lives of the nation of the Jews, the Jews under the Persian rule were sent back to their homeland and said, rebuild the temple and rebuild the city and rebuild the walls. So Darius didn't say all that, but the Persians did. Okay, right. So moving on, then verse 2, and now I will tell you the truth. Behold, 3 more kings are going to arise in Persia. Then a fourth will gain far more riches than all. Now, I'm going to go ahead and pause right there, because let me just say what we're headed into. We are headed into a prophecy that really is unparalleled in terms of just a small section of Scripture. By some people's accounts, there is, and Alex, you can count this for us, okay? There are 135 or more than 135 different prophecies in the next 35 verses. So, that seems
Did you do
almost
the
that seems right improbable, right, to me. But
135 over
135
verses.
over 35 verses. So it's a lot. It's quite a bit. It's 3 prophecies a verse about. No, it'd be more than that. It'd be, well, someone do the math.
It's 3.8571426.
3.8751426 prophecies per verse.
A lot.
Thank you
Oh
for
my
it.
gosh.
So anyway, so that is, it's remarkable, and every single one of these have been fulfilled. Okay, in fact, they were going to be fulfilled in a time span that would be 300 years after Daniel. Okay, so somewhere around there, 200 to 300 years in that time span after Daniel's was hearing this. Okay, so it's amazing in terms of its precision, and it has, this section of Daniel has led to, as you can imagine, a significant amount of criticism from really anyone that has a lack of faith in that this is truly written by a man that knew Nebuchadnezzar and served Nebuchadnezzar. Okay, because there's no way that he could have known the things that we're about to read. Okay, in fact, the criticism of Daniel being a forgery started as early as the 3rd century A.D. Okay, there were critics already then saying this could not have been written by this man Daniel. Okay, we're going to take the view that it was, because it was an angel that was truly speaking, and the angel was moved by the Holy Spirit to tell these things to Daniel. Okay, now it does then pose some challenges in terms of how we teach it. Okay, because what we're going to be doing is we're going to be reading history without names, and so what I'm going to try and do is I'm going to try and give names in the events that fulfill them. Okay, and so I thought it would be appropriate to go ahead and, before I jumped into this, I did go ahead and jump into verse 2, but I thought it'd be really appropriate to read a quote from one of the commentaries that I read. The man's name is John Walvoord. Okay, and that's just the guy's commentary. Okay, but what we're about to read is really a fairly massive expansion of Daniel 7. In particular, the 3rd kingdom in Daniel 7. Okay, the 3rd kingdom was the leopard with 4 wings of an eagle and 4 heads. Okay, either that or you advance into Daniel 8, and it would be a fairly massive expansion of the kingdom of the goat. Okay, not just the floating unigoat, but everyone wanted to hear it, right? But also how the 4 horns split. It's a massive expansion of that. Okay, but here's what this man says. He says, in attempting the difficult exegesis of this portion, the general principle should be observed that prophecy, as far as it goes, is accurate, but that prophecy is selective. The revelation does not contain all the history of the period of or name all the rulers. It is not always possible to determine why some facts are included and others excluded. But the total picture of struggle and turmoil that characterized the period of the Third Empire being a reference back to Daniel 7, is portrayed by a special reference to Antiochus Epiphanes, who is given more space than any other ruler in this chapter because of the relevance of his activity to the people of Israel and the similarities between his actions and those of the future Antichrist. Right? So what he is essentially saying is that what you're about to read and what we're about to comment on, it's history, but it's missing parts, and we don't really understand why it's missing parts. We don't understand why some parts are put in there and some aren't. And that's a question for the Lord when you get to see him. Okay? Because there's no amount of speculation why some would be there and not. Okay, I'm not going to even try. Right, so I'm going to try and read through this and give you names and events, and I would encourage you to do this on your own. as well. Okay, I will tell you, I've been through this chapter on 3 different occasions by other people teaching me, and when I came to it, yeah, we got to pause. We got someone coming here, so what are you doing? Rachel! Hey, Rachel!
Hello!
Come on in. What are you doing in town? We started without you.
Oh, I know. I was like, I missed the point of being fashionably late.
Hi.
It's good to see you.
Good to see you.
Hi, Katie. Oh my gosh, they're both on.
This is Alex. But
Alex is right there.
Well, I know Katie's like right next to him.
Your face was really familiar, but Sarah.
Yeah,
Okay.
we were roommates.
Okay, that's
I watched
okay.
her one other time.
Yes.
Okay. Well, we started, but
I know.
Rachel, it's great to see you. We'll catch up after we finish. So,
Nice to see you again.
yeah.
Got so many options.
Yeah. Okay, so I was just saying that we're going into Daniel chapter 11, which is a really complicated chapter of Daniel. Okay, and I was actually saying this, that I've been through this, I've had this taught to me on 3 different occasions, and when I went back to study it, I remembered not very much of it. Okay, so it's just one of those things that there's a lot of detail. There's 35 verses, and there's 135 different prophecies that are in those 35 verses, which comes out to be 3.78154632142 prophecies per verse.
To be exact.
To be exact, on average.
I picked a great day.
You picked a great day to come to Colorado and do this. So anyway, so I'm going to try and just...
Can I just ask you,
Yes,
do you think
please.
that if we understood that ancient history better, we would have more? Like, is that
Oh,
why
yeah.
it doesn't sink in? Is just because
Oh,
of
yeah.
the context of...
Well, the ancient history is really... right. I mean, so because it's king after king after king after king.
Okay.
And the actions that they're taking. So if you understood ancient history, it would map onto it very well. That's why there's critics, right? Critical scholars of this, I mean, that know the ancient history, look at it and say there's no way that this was written
Exactly.
by a man that purportedly lived in the 5th and 6th century, because it's far too similar to the way history actually laid out in these environments.
Okay.
Right? So yes, so for us layman people that don't understand ancient history all that well, I mean, I guess I should talk about myself. So maybe Sarah here is an expert in ancient history. But anyway, for myself, being a biochemist, I don't fully understand ancient history. So, okay, so that's what I mean by this.
Okay.
Okay. And it is one of those things that, because it all has come to pass, it's harder to see direct application to our lives too. Although I'll kind of talk about that at the end.
Okay.
So, okay. All right. So let's go ahead and now verse 2. I'm going to read verse 2. And now I will tell you the truth. Behold, 3 more kings are going to rise in Persia. Cambius, Pseudosmyrtus, Darius would have been those 3 kings. Those would have been the next in order. Then a 4th, whose name was Xerxes, will gain far more riches than all of them. As soon as he becomes strong, through his riches, he will arouse the whole empire against the realm of Greece, which Xerxes did. So Xerxes was able to mount or amass an army of 100,000 soldiers, which is pretty remarkable. That's a lot of logistics. But he amassed an army of 100,000 and attacked the kingdom of Greece and failed. So it was defeated. And that then, right, I'm not sure how this lays out historically with Alexander the Great, but Greece is going to turn around and be the ultimate defeater of Persia. Okay, so, and that's our next verse. And a mighty king will arise. This is out of now Greece, and he will rule with great authority and do as he pleases. But as soon as he has arisen, his kingdom will be broken up and parceled out towards the 4 points of the compass, though not to his own descendants, nor according to his authority which he wielded, for his sovereignty will be uprooted and given to others besides them. Okay, so in other words, this is a fairly clear description of Alexander the Great. Alexander the Great, we talked about in chapter 8 of Daniel. He over a span of about 18 years expanded his kingdom to to the greatest kingdom that the world had ever seen up to that point in time, in a matter of a few years, really. And then he died a very early death. He died in his 30s, and on his deathbed they said, well, what do we do with the kingdom? And he said, well, give it to the strong. That was his how he said it. And he had actually 2 children. One of them was illegitimate, so he didn't have really a rightful claim to the throne. The other one was 13 at the time of Alexander's death, which he then was the rightful king, but was murdered soon after the death of his father. I mean, this is the pleasure of being, right, the son of Alexander the Great. So he was killed very, very early in his life. And then 4 generals from the Grecian army then, through, I'm sure, things that were, war and battles and these types of things, divided the kingdom. It took them longer to divide the kingdom than it took to build the kingdom. Okay. So that's what these verses are referencing. Now, from verse 5 on, through the rest of the time, we'll hear of the kings, either a king of the south or the king of the north. So we're going to really hyper-focus, this revelation really hyper-focuses on north, and north is Syria, and south is Egypt. Okay, and they're right in between them, and this is, for us to understand, right in between, of course, Syria and Egypt is Jerusalem. Okay, so anytime these 2 kingdoms were battling and taking ground, Jerusalem was right in the middle of all of it. Okay, and they would constantly pass through Jerusalem in route to these battles. Okay, so and for certain that's why this prophecy is focusing on these 2 kingdoms, because the effect that it would have on the people who had returned Jerusalem and built the city and the temple. Okay, so verse 5, then the king of the south, okay, I'm going to have to keep looking back and forth in my notes, but then the king of the south, so south is Egypt, will grow strong along with one of his princes, who will gain ascendancy over him and obtain dominion. His domain will be a great dominion indeed. And after some years so I'm going to start introducing names here, but after some years they will form an alliance, they being the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom. Okay, the northern kingdom's king at this point in time is Antiochus II, and we're going to have Antiochus III, and we're going to have Antiochus Epiphanes by the time the night is over. So we got to keep our Antiochuses straight. This is Antiochus II, and the king of the south was Ptolemy II, and there are several Ptolemies. In fact, there's all the way up through Ptolemy VI, which is fun. Okay, but this is Ptolemy II. But after some years, they will form an alliance, these 2 kings, and the daughter of the king of the south, her name is Bernice, okay, will come to the king of the north to carry out a peaceful arrangement, meaning that she will be given as a wife to the king of the north, Bernice. Now, the king of the north, Antiochus II, has to divorce his current wife to do so. Aha! And that's going to become very important, okay? But this was to make this arrangement, this treaty, okay? But she, being Bernice, will not retain her position of power. Now, here's why. Because her dad, Ptolemy II, dies. And so Antiochus II says, well, there's no real more alliance, so I don't really need to keep going on with this Bernice. So he puts her away and takes back his original wife, who then murders Bernice and Antiochus II. Right? So, wow. Right.
Wow.
Right? So this is all written on the pages of history, and it's written here and before the pages of history. But she will not retain her position of power, nor will he, this would be Ptolemy, remain with his power. But she, Bernice, will be given up, okay, by Antiochus II, along with those who brought her in, and the one who sired her, which is her dad, of course, Ptolemy II, as well as he who supported her in those times. Right? And so we'll just leave it at that, right? So, I mean, it doesn't necessarily tell us about the murder in that time, but that's what happens, okay? And this is the fallout of it, okay? Now, jumping forward, verse 7, but one of the descendants, and by jumping forward I mean prophecy again, there's things that are missed. We're getting parts of the picture, not the whole picture. But one of the descendants of her line, this is Bernice's brother, will arise in his place. This would be Ptolemy's place, and he will come against their army and enter the fortress of the king of the north, and he will deal with them and display great strength. Okay, the king of the north is still Antiochus II at this point in time, hasn't yet been quite murdered by his wife. Okay, but anyway, so this would be Ptolemy's son that comes up against his army, okay, in the north, and defeats them. In fact, verse 8 describes this. And also, he shows us great strength, and also their gold and their metal images and their precious vessels of silver and gold he will take into captivity to Egypt, and he, on his part, will refrain from attacking the king of the north for some years. So he goes up to the king of the north. He defeats him in battle. He then loots and takes, I think, let me look, it's 40,000 talents worth of gold and silver from the temples of Syria. Okay, so a lot of quote-unquote booty. Okay, and that's booty, how it would be used, not in our modern day interpretation of booty. But I had to say it for Rachel's sake, because she's here. That's for you, Rachel. Okay. Yeah.
Alex laughing.
Alex, I can't even see Alex. I don't know. I'm recording. It's on mine.
Yeah, I know.
Okay. I'm gonna beep it out. Beep. Okay. So anyway.
My memory.
So a whole lot of loot. How about that? Not looty, but loot. Okay. All right. So anyway, and that brings us to where? Oh, and then there's the period of peace. Okay, so it says they will refrain from attacking the north for some years. Then the latter, okay, verse 9, I gotta check my notes here. Yeah, then the latter will enter the realm of the king of the south, but will return to his own land. Okay, so I think that at that point in time, and this is where it can become a little bit confusing. At that point in time, Antiochus II is no longer, and he has been replaced by this individual, Seleucus Callinicus. Not sure I pronounced that right. Okay, but in fact, I believe that now I'm looking at my notes. I might have misspoken. I think that starting in verse 7, the king of the north is this, not Antiochus, because he has been murdered. It's Seleucus Callinicus. Okay, just in case.
And that's who Ptolemy III,
the third,
who is Berenice's brother, goes against, because Antiochus was already killed by Laodice.
Yes, which I didn't mention, right? Because I can't pronounce her name, so I just said the wife, his original wife.
Okay, and Ptolemy III killed her.
I
According
didn't
to my
know that.
notes, I think that's what happened, because it's called the Laodicean War.
Okay, I didn't know that. So see, Becky, it's a good thing you're here.
Well, no.
So.
But anyways, okay, so we're tracking.
We're tracking. Yes. So I was wrong. It's Seleucus Callinicus. It started in verse 7, the king of the north. Okay. Okay. Whew. Okay. So verse 10 now is where we've come to. Let me check my notes to make sure. Okay. Yeah. All right. I got this. All right. Now verse 10, and his sons, okay, will mobilize and assemble a multitude of great force, and one of them will keep on coming and overflow and pass through, that he may again wage war up to his very fortress. This is what I'm saying. You're reading history without names and locations necessarily. And so it's hard to try and put some of these things together. But his sons would be a reference to, based off of the upcoming verses, would be a reference to Antiochus II's sons. Okay, Seleucus Callinicus has passed off the scene. I'm not entirely sure. I'm trying to look at here. I don't have the eventual fate of Seleucus Calliculaus, but this is now a reference to Antiochus III. Okay, and he's going to go to war with the kings of the south. There's a seesaw battle, and he takes a lot of land all the way to the south of Gaza. Right, so this is penetrating that southern kingdom to a fair extent. It goes well past Jerusalem. Okay. Verse 11, and the king of the south will be enraged at what happened in verse 10 and go forth and fight with the king of the north, Antiochus III, which is also called Antiochus the Great. Then the latter will raise a great multitude, but the multitude will be given into the hand of the former. Okay. So then the latter, see, I even get lost. Then the latter would be the king of the north will raise a great multitude, but the multitude will be given into the hand of the former, the king of the south. Okay. When
Who's the king of the south at this point?
Antiochus III.
No, that's the
That's
king of the
not-
north.
Oh no, Ptolemy the Fourth. You're right. Yeah, I hadn't said that. Ptolemy the Fourth. So we're on to our fourth Ptolemy. Ptolemy with a P. P-T. Right. Yeah. Ptolemy. I'm fairly certain I'm pronouncing that right. Ptolemy. Not Ptolemy. Pterodactyl. Exactly. It's one of those silent P's. Okay. All right. So anyway, so that's the king of the south. Okay. Now, where were we? Did we get to verse 13? For the king of the north will again raise a great multitude, about 70,000 individuals, a greater multitude than the former, and after an interval of some period he will press on with great army and much equipment. Okay. So not too much more to say about that. Again, there's this, maybe you're getting the picture that there's a lot of like contention between the north and the south, with Jerusalem jammed in the middle. Okay, and that's really true.
So in verse 11, when the
Uh-huh.
king of the south and the king of the north are meeting, they do not finish each other off.
That's right.
So there's not like an overtaking
That's
that
right.
happens there.
There's this
They
seesaw.
fight, they
Boom,
can't
boom,
necessarily
boom.
do anything, and then they split.
Yep.
And that's why he comes back. Okay.
Yep. Okay. Now, verse 14. Okay. Okay, so these verses are going to describe events that happened somewhere between 203 and 197 BC. Okay, and we're going to read through verse 17, and I'll try and keep my king straight. Now, in those times, many will rise up against the king of the south. Now, at this point in time, the king of the south is now Ptolemy V, who's a 7-year-old child. Okay, so very young individual. The violent ones among your people, so this is the angel talking to Daniel, so your people would be a reference to Israelites. And there was a contingent of Antiochus the Great, or Antiochus III, who was the southern king still at this time, of Jews that fought for him. Okay. Among your people will also lift themselves up in order to fulfill the vision, but they will fall down. Then the king of the north, Antiochus III, will come, cast up a siege mound, and capture a well-fortified city. That city is the city of Sidon. Okay. And the forces of the south, okay, Egyptian forces, will not stand their ground, not even their choicest troops, for there will be no strength to make a stand. Okay. But he who comes is Antiochus III, verse 16. Against him will do as he pleases, so he's going to have a fairly decisive victory in this sense, and no one will be able to withstand him. He will also stay for a time in the beautiful land, that would be a reference to Israel, with destruction in his hand. Okay. Right. Verse 17. And he will set, Antiochus III, will set his face to come with power of his whole kingdom, bring with him a proposal of peace, which he will put into effect. He will also give him the daughter of Cleopatra, the daughter of women, that is Cleopatra, to ruin it. But she will not take a stand or be on his side. So he has this decisive victory, Antiochus III, has this decisive victory against Egypt and feels like, okay, this is the time where I could make a treaty that's very much in my favor, and with Egypt, because he still hasn't really taken down the Egyptian kingdom, and he's going to give Cleopatra his daughter as part of that treaty, which they do, but she falls in love with Ptolemy V, who apparently is getting more advanced in age beyond a 7-year-old at this point in time. Okay, so that plan doesn't really work out for Antiochus III, okay, in terms of this treaty where he would have someone in their courts that would be loyal to him. Okay. Now, verse 18. Right? Then he, Antiochus III, will turn his face to the coastlands and capture many. Now, coastlands, if we're to, again, follow along in history with this, Antiochus III, wait, is it Antiochus III? No, it's not any longer. No, it is still. We're still there. In verse 18, it's still Antiochus III. Okay? He turns to make conquests against the coastlands of Greece and Asia Minor is where he starts to. So he starts to actually go north now, okay, and try and take land to the north of him, not just to the south, and try and capture many. But middle of verse 18, but a commander will put a stop to his scorn against him. Now at this time, this enters Rome. Right, so Rome is a growing empire at this point in time, and they're going to start to have significant influence then on the events of this northern kingdom and even the southern kingdom. Okay, this commander, I can't remember. Do you have the name of the commander? I can't remember this as general's name. I can't.
I don't have it written down here.
Okay, I can't remember it. Okay, but anyway, we'll put a stop to his scorn against him. Moreover, he will repay him for his scorn. So Antiochus is defeated in this battle, I think of Thermopylae and Magnesia, okay, and is forced into a treaty with Rome, okay, because he realizes, I can't defeat Rome at this point in time. Okay, so he signs this treaty, which what that means in that time was, I'm going to pay you a lot of money for you not destroying the rest of my forces. Okay, and I'm going to pay it on a regular basis, what would be called a tribute. Okay, so verse 19, so he will turn his face toward the fortresses of his own land, but he will stumble and fall and be found no more. So in order to pay these tributes, he's going to have to start to loot his own people. And he dies, Antiochus III dies attempting to rob the temple in Bel, the temple of Bel in Elam. I don't know how he died, but he does. Okay, so Antiochus III is now gone. Okay. Now, verse 20, there's one verse on the next king, and his name is Seleucus Philopator. Fine. Okay. Then in his place, Seleucus in place of Antiochus III, one will arise who will send an oppressor through the jewel of his kingdom. This would be Seleucus Philopator. Yet within a few days he will be shattered, though neither in anger nor in battle. Okay, so Seleucus Philopator goes and he has to raise money to pay this tribute to Rome, and it says he's shattered through neither anger nor in battle. He's assassinated. So I'm not sure why he's not in battle. I'm not sure exactly what it means through anger. Okay.
So I think it's interesting to note here that Seleucus Philopator is the first son of Antiochus III.
Right.
He's the first son of Antiochus the Great.
Yes.
And because the second son is the crazy person, right?
No.
He's
Antiochus Epiphanes is not a son of...
I have that he's the second son of Antiochus the Great.
Well, maybe you and I will talk about that later.
Okay.
Because what I turned up is something different. Okay, so starting in verse 21...
History's hard.
So starting in verse 21, the next 14 verses are about one individual, Antiochus Epiphanes. Now, we studied Daniel 8, and we had this big description of Antiochus Epiphanes. Epiphanes it means like the divine one or something like that. But the Jews called him the madman, and he was truly a madman. Okay, Now, this is where it's interesting, Becky. All right, so verse 21, it says, in his place, a despicable person will arise. Antiochus Epiphanes, on whom the honor of kingship has not been conferred, but he will come in a time of tranquility and seize the kingdom by intrigue. So from what I understand, okay, in the commentaries I have read, it says, on whom the honor of kingship has not been conferred because he did not have a legitimate right to the throne. Seleucus Philopator had 2 children, one of whom was in prison in Rome. The other one was a baby. And Antiochus Epiphanes positions himself to say, I will take the kingdom and execute the rights of the king until the baby is ready to rule, while at the same time commissioning an assassination of the baby to then take, and this is what it means by intrigue. Many people believe that Antiochus actually had the baby killed, okay, and then stepped in as the king.
Right, but
of
that
Syria.
baby is the son of Seleucus Philopator, who's
right.
the first son of Antiochus the Great, and Antiochus Epiphanes is the second son of Antiochus the Great, making this nephew
we're both right.
in line. The nephew was in line. He should have been king, but he was held hostage politically in Rome.
Yes.
So that's
Yeah.
when Antiochus Epiphanes came in and named himself co-regent
Okay.
with another of Seleucus' sons, who was an infant, and then he murdered him a few years later.
Okay, so I missed the connection to Antiochus III, right?
Yeah,
Right.
I think clear as mud, right? So, yeah, it was just so yeah, because there was one
I didn't
son.
say this was easy.
There was one son, Seleucus Philopator, and his brother is
Of Antiochus.
Antiochus Epiphanes
Okay.
the fourth.
Okay.
Antiochus the fourth Epiphanes.
Okay, so he was in a different line that didn't have a legitimate right to the throne.
Because
Seleucus
his
Philopator
brother had
already
kids.
had it.
Yeah.
Right, okay.
And so they were in line to the throne, and he went in and usurped it. But
Right.
he's still the second son of Antiochus
He's
the
still
Great.
related, right? Okay, okay, that makes sense. Okay,
Not just some stranger.
not just some. I mean, it makes sense. His name is Antiochus, right? I mean, everyone's name is Antiochus at this point in time. Might as well.
Or Philopator.
Or Philopator, or Ptolemy, or
Come up with different
whatever.
names.
Okay, all right. So let's now we're going to start to look at this Antiochus Epiphanes. So, I mean, so he killed then his nephew, his baby nephew.
Yes.
Essentially. Yeah. Okay.
He's a sicko.
He's
That's why he's called a vile person.
Or despicable in my translation.
Yes.
Despicable. It sounds like Donald Duck or something. Okay. Anyway.
Definitely listening to this.
Yes. Exactly. Okay. Verse 22. And the overflowing forces will be flooded away before him and shattered, and also the prince of the covenant. Okay. Now, the prince of the covenant would have been a reference to Jerusalem and the high priest, who Antiochus Epiphanes, as we discussed in Daniel chapter 8, replaced the rightful high priest with another high priest whose name was Jason, right? And because he was trying to exert his influence on Jerusalem and essentially Hellenize the Jewish culture, okay, while at the same time getting tribute and taxes from the temple, because he's got to pay taxes and he's got his own plans, okay, right? So he replaces that rightful prince of the covenant, okay. Now, verse 23, and after an alliance is made with him, he will practice deception, and he will go up and gain power with a small force of people. Let me see what this is. Yeah, I don't have much on that. Okay, great.
So this is Antiochus Epiphanes we're talking about.
Yes.
Okay. So basically, he's starting to invade these countries with small little forces.
Yep.
He's not taking them with, like, it's opposite of Antiochus the Great, or he's not
Right.
coming in with big, huge forces. He's kind of coming in politically and making alliances.
Yes, and
and
we're-
getting
yeah.
them to give. Okay.
Right, so verse 24, in a time of tranquility, he will enter the richest part of the realm, and he will accomplish what his fathers, Antiochus Epiphanes' fathers, never did, nor his ancestors. He will distribute plunder, booty, and possessions. It says it right here. And possessions among them, and he will devise his schemes against strongholds, but only for a time. Okay, so here's what Antiochus did. He was unlike, so what you were referring to, he was unlike Antiochus III or these other kings of the north in that he amassed a great amount of wealth from heavy taxes on much of his kingdom that then he used to bribe people in key places in the kingdoms that he wished to take over. Okay, in particular the southern kingdom, the Egyptian kingdom. Okay, and so that's what's kind of being described there. So it says, so in a time of tranquility, he will enter the richest part of the realm, and he will accomplish what his fathers never did. He's going to take their money, nor his ancestors. He will distribute plunder and booty and possessions among them, meaning that I'm going to bribe you, and he will devise his schemes against strongholds, but only for a time. Okay, now verse 25. Let me look at
So
that.
that's really interesting and provocative when you think about him as a type of the Antichrist, right? Because we're living in a time where for anybody that could help peace come to that region, Muslims, Christians, Jews, that area, right? The Antichrist is going to be one of the only people that we know is going to be, because there's going to be sacrificing again happening, so there's going to be some sort of huge change over in that region, and he's going to get to have somehow come in
Yeah, and
and influenced it
Right.
only for a time, and
Yeah.
then he's going to get where other people have not been able to get, I guess is what
Yeah,
I'm thinking.
So what Becky's kind of referring to, just to enrich this study a little bit, so there are lots of verses that appear in the Bible, in particular in the book of Revelation, that seem to be describing someone that is very similar to Antiochus Epiphanes. In fact, his actions and some of the things that he does seem almost identical. But we know that the book of Revelation was written well after Antiochus Epiphanes was off the scene. Antiochus Epiphanes was during the intertestamental period. He was like 170 years before Christ. The book of Revelation was probably written in 90 AD. So a good 60 years after Christ's death and resurrection. So those descriptions of this yet future individual, there's a lot of people that will see what's called a type in Antiochus Epiphanes, that he is similar in influence, similar in action against Israel as what this future potential Antichrist is. Right. So that's what you're saying. Right?
Yeah.
I kind of see that description.
Well, because right now, they're like all this, like, I mean, even with Trump's peace plan, like, everybody's like, heck no, right? Like, the Palestinians, just everybody. And so this is going to be somebody who comes in and accomplishes something that people before him could not. And he's probably going to do it very similar. He's going to enter in these kind of, not this, like, huge presence, but rather this kind of buying. Right. And taking and buying people off, and so.
Yep. Which is politics.
Yes.
All right. So verse 25. And so this is just a description of more of those bribing and the schemes. And he will stir up his strength and courage against the king of the south. So this is Antiochus Epiphanes with a large army. So he does amass a large army. So the king of the south will mobilize an extremely large army and mighty army for war, but he will not stand, for schemes will be devised against him. So those are these schemes that Antiochus Epiphanes has people in key places that are going to make it very difficult for the king of the south, no matter how powerful he is, to defeat him. Okay, and those who eat his choice food will destroy him, and his army will overflow, but many will fall down slain. As for both kings, their hearts will be intent on evil, and they will speak lies to each other at the same table. In other words, they come together for a treaty, and they essentially lie to each other. There's no earnest expectation of a treaty. They sign something, but there's nothing that really comes about from it because they're both lying to one another. Antiochus Epiphanes can't be trusted. Okay, essentially. But it will not succeed, for the end is still to come at the appointed time. Then he, Antiochus Epiphanes, will return to his land with much plunder, but his heart will be set against the Holy Covenant, and he will take action and then return to his own land. Okay, so there's this big battle, right? And they have this the north and the south come together, Antiochus Epiphanes, and this would be Ptolemy the sixth by this time in the south. Okay, there's the battle, and they make it through the battle and to the point where now Antiochus and Ptolemy sit down and try and make a treaty, but nothing can really come about from it because neither one of them trust each other.
Well, I have written down that there was treason amongst Ptolemy's leaders.
Right.
So I don't
More
know
than
that.
likely, yeah, treason. More than likely because of the who knows, possibly the bribes that
Yeah.
Antiochus, the Epiphanes had
So he paid people.
to do, right? So then
It's like Volta.
on his way back, so remember he's got all this thing going on in Jerusalem too. Okay, so he's got Jason, who should be he is his high priest who he set up, should be paying him, but then another guy, I can't remember his name. I meant to look it up before, but there was another high priest that came to, or another person that said, "Oh, I'm going to come and Jason will pay you this much, I'll pay you even more." Okay, for the high priest, give me the high priest, and I'm going to pay you even more. So that's going on. Okay, and the people in Jerusalem recognize that, right, how mistreated the covenant is being, right, and the original intent, God's original intent for the temple is being done. But Antiochus comes back through their land, taxes them heavily, and persecutes them essentially. Okay, he kills many at this point in time. He sets his heart against the Holy Covenant, right? Then, verse 29, this is where it's going to really turn bad for Jerusalem. Okay, and we're kind of nearing the end of this portion of the study, but at the appointed time, he, Antiochus Epiphanes, will return and come into the south, but this last time it will not turn out the way it did before. Okay, meaning that the influence that Antiochus Epiphanes had before is not going to happen this time. And here's why. For ships of Kittim, now Kittim is Cyprus, the island in the Mediterranean Sea, at this point in time had been taken over by Rome and was one of their key naval centers for their naval warfare, right? So ships of Kittim refers to Roman ships that had sailed from Cyprus into Egypt, okay, and amassed their forces in Egypt, okay. Therefore, he will be disheartened. So the ships of Kittim will come against him, meaning that Rome is now not only north of him, but they're south of him too. Okay. Therefore, he will be disheartened, Antiochus Epiphanes, and he will return and become enraged at the Holy Covenant and take action. So he will come back and show regard for those who forsake the Holy Covenant. Now, at this point in time, the persecution of the Jews becomes great. Okay, and the reason is because they are now actively rebelling against Antiochus Epiphanes. He's ticked off that he can't take Egypt now because he's got Rome in the way, and so his full wrath is unleashed on Jerusalem at this point in time. He kills, by the time he's done with Jerusalem, he kills more than 100,000 Jews, slaughters them, in the worst of possible ways. Okay, and he then also goes into the temple and desecrates the temple in the worst imaginable way for a Jew. Okay, and that's described here in verse 31. And forces from him will arise, desecrate the sanctuary fortress, and do away with the regular sacrifice, and they will set up the abomination of desolation. Okay, that is where Antiochus erected a temple to Zeus, not a temple, but an idol to Zeus, sacrificed a pig to Zeus in the Jewish temple, and then spread the pig's blood all over the temple. Okay, and for a Jew, that's like the worst thing imaginable, right? They can't eat pigs, and then to have a foreign god being worshipped in God's temple with pig blood is like, anyway. Okay, bad stuff. Okay. And so that's what he does, and that has been referred to and is referred to right here as the abomination of desolation. Now, here's what's interesting about that, and this gets to what Becky was kind of talking about. In Matthew 24, Christ himself specifically says, when you see the abomination of desolation occurring, right? And that would be a reference to something future to him, because he's not looking back at this. And he says, as Daniel spoke about, let the reader understand. So it's a reference to something future that Christ has seen. And this is where we get this idea that there's this other individual that will do something similar to the Jewish nation in the future that's like Antiochus Epiphanes. Paul says that he will actually desecrate the temple. The Antichrist will desecrate the temple in a very similar way. Okay? Paul doesn't mention Antiochus Epiphanes or abomination of desolation, but he says that he will put a stop to the regular sacrifice and these kind of things. Okay. So anyway, so verse 32. Let's go ahead and finish this out. But and by smooth words, this would be back to Antiochus Epiphanes, he will turn to godlessness those who act wickedly toward the covenant. But the people who know their God will display strength and take action. And those who have insight among the people will give understanding to the many, yet they will fall by the sword and by flame, by captivity and by plunder for many days. Now when they fall, they will be granted a little help, and many will join with them in hypocrisy. And some of those who have insight will fall in order to refine, purge, and make them pure until the end time, because it is still to come at the appointed time. So that's... Let's unpack that. What is being described there is the Maccabean revolt. Okay, there will be some Jews who are going to say, we're going to withstand Antiochus Epiphanes. Okay, those people who withstand Antiochus Epiphanes, many of them will meet their fate. Right, they will be slaughtered, no doubt. Okay, some of them won't, but many of them will. Okay. There will also be Jews, though, that are going to take, just like anyone else, okay, that Antiochus Epiphanes has worked with, they will take bribes and they will work against the rebellion, right? Anytime there's a rebellion, it's always good to have inside people in that rebellion telling you what's going to happen, and Antiochus Epiphanes had these. Okay, ultimately, it will culminate, though, in the Maccabean revolt and the cleansing of the temple, which is now celebrated as Hanukkah. Okay, and it's actually referred to in the New Testament as the Feast of Dedication, which Christ in the Gospel of John attends a Feast of Dedication, okay, Hanukkah, which is a feast given by the Jews in recognition and memory of the Maccabeans, who eventually regained the temple and cleansed the temple, okay, meaning they removed Zeus and they cleaned all the big blood and all that, and set it up for sacrifice again. Okay, so that's what's being described, and there are lots of words there, not all of which I, even in my studies, understand, or maybe people don't even understand, because again, we're looking at ancient history. It's hard to understand, hard to hit on all the holes of ancient history. So, okay, we're going to stop right there. That's verse 36.
So I think it's interesting. So when it's talking about the time appointed, can you speak to that in verse 35? And some of them of understanding shall fall to try them and to purge and to make them white, even to the time of the end, because it is yet for a time appointed. Is that referring to 70th week?
70th week, you mean in the future?
Yeah.
It could be. Because in verse 36, there's a shift into... It's a subtle shift, but it's a shift into things that we know from an ancient history standpoint weren't fulfilled. Not with the accuracy that these things that we just read were fulfilled. Okay.
So you're saying that once verse 36 starts happening, there's some things maybe that are still future to us.
Yeah. And so
okay.
And so right through this is this underlying current that there are things that will go all the way to the end, that go past even what we are thinking about with Antiochus Epiphanes.
Okay.
That seems to take, not all, but many of the people that look into this and know ancient history say that even the critics of these passages will say, well, because they'll look at verse 36 through 45 and they say, well, they got it way off. It's historically wrong. But they'll criticize verses 1 through 35 and say it's historically too right. It's too right in the first 35 verses, and clearly you can see where they start to screw up in verse 36.
Why don't they just take the logical thing that says for the time appointed, because in verse 35, that's what he's talking about, because it's
Yes, to
it's
come.
not yet come. It's,
So I'm not going to comment on that because I can't know why they don't do what you would call the logical thing. So anyway, so 135 prophecies, you can probably see how it would be really almost 4 prophecies a verse, right? I mean, there's just these things that are just ding, 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 ding lined up, okay? And so, I thought about this and we just went through it and, we learned a little bit about ancient history and that's interesting. But when you start to think about this from a biblical perspective and from a, why would God want this in here? I think it's hard for us to think about it this way, but imagine if you were part of the Maccabean revolt, right? Or you were in Jerusalem during the time of Antiochus Epiphanes, right? And you had access to these writings. You could see that, oh, wait a second, there was this prophet, Daniel, long ago that spoke about the time that I'm living in, okay? And it would become very much something that you would sit there and say, I wonder what this means. And you would really start to investigate what this means, and you start to map it out on the history that's taking place in front of you. And I would presume, it would lead you to prayer, and it would lead you to seeking God at that point in time. Okay, what's going to happen next? Am I one of these people that's going to be killed? Are my children going to be? Am I, what should I do? Should I leave? Maybe I should just take off. This is not going to go well for me. And maybe there were people that read this and said, I'm leaving, I'm out of here. Okay, maybe there was some that said, no, I need to stay here. I'm going to be part of this Maccabean revolt. There is going to be a victory in this. Okay, so I would just ask you that when you look at this, try and imagine putting yourself into the time that this was speaking to. And then step out of that and say, okay, there are still prophecies in the Bible, for the book of Revelation in particular, where it seems that there is much of those things that, if you look at history, even from the time of Christ up to now, there's things that just, it doesn't fit, okay? So does that mean that it will fit in the future? Does that mean that we might be some of those people that, starting to seem like this is fitting? Should that lead us to prayer? Should that lead us to, right? I mean, so it's hard to say with all those things, right? The timing of those events, but certainly that is a function of prophecies to lead us to prayer and lead us to the Lord and lead us to what is on His heart and what is in the future and just a scene of His plan, right? He says in John, what is it? I think it's in John 7. I think it's 17. I may be wrong. Don't quote me on that. But Jesus says, I no longer call you slaves, for a slave doesn't know what his master is up to, but I call you friends, for I have told you all the things that will come. Okay? And so God here is just sharing His plan with us. Okay? And sharing His heart with us. In that sense, Abraham was called the friend of God. We can be considered, in that sense, a friend of God as we study these things. So, okay?
I think it's John 15:15.
Okay, John 15. Okay.
But I think it's somewhere else in John also. Isn't there another place in John where it talks about that, see, I have told you these things ahead of time so that you might believe. And I think that's
well, yeah, there's several places in John that he says
yeah.
that. John 13, he says that.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, in the Last Supper, he mentions, I'm telling you this ahead of time so that you might believe that I am who I said I am.
Right.
Yeah.
And then even in this passage that we just read, then he uses that time to, what did he say over here? That some of them fell, but that these times try them, purge them, and make them white, even to the time of the end, right?
We'll talk about that again in chapter 12, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because I think that's just so important to keep in mind as we read prophecy. Because as we read it, just especially as a Western mind, I think we can be like, okay, where's the timeline and where do I fit into that necessarily? And if we don't see where that necessarily is, then I think we can just then our mind doesn't necessarily tune into, okay, when I see this is meant to do something, like as we start to see events move, and I don't know that we'll necessarily see the things of Revelation necessarily in our time, I don't know. I feel like Ezekiel 38 and 39 are probably closer than, and so those are, those types of things are things that then when we read them, we're like, this is meant to, as it corresponds to history, it's supposed to transact something in the human heart. It's supposed to purify, purge, and refine us in a way.
Prepare us.
Yeah.
Christ says in Matthew 24, right after he gives this whole description of the end times and when he's returning, he says, pay attention. Pay attention. That's what you need to do. You need to be paying attention. I've told you these things, now pay attention. Right? I mean, that's his encouragement to anyone that's willing to read that, is that you really need to be paying attention.
And just kind of keep it before your gaze.
And I think that a great example, if you want a modern day example of someone that's really, understands Scripture and has a ability to communicate what these things might look like, would be Joel C. Rosenberg. Do any of you know Joel Rosenberg? The C is important because there's two authors that are Joel Rosenberg. So if you go Google Joel Rosenberg, you'll get a different guy. Alex, do you know?
Is he the one who wrote like the Last Jihad?
Yeah.
Series? Yeah, I've read those ones. Oh,
Yeah.
Good stuff.
Yeah, very good. So he's written several books after that now, but he's a New York Times best-selling author, Joel C. Rosenberg. He's a Christian who would be considered a Messianic Jew. He was Jewish by birth. Okay, his parents were Jews, and he has written. He went to Syracuse and became a political advisor. He was a political advisor to Benjamin Netanyahu before he became prime minister. Okay, Netanyahu ran for office with Joel Rosenberg as one of his advisors and didn't make the office. And then Joel Rosenberg left and he became the prime minister. And Joel C. Rosenberg always makes fun of himself, like all the political campaigns I've ever been on, they usually become a great politician after I leave, so I decided to turn to writing. But he's a really well-connected individual, and he writes these books. The first one that he wrote was it called The Last Jihad?
I think so.
I think that was the first, because it was a series of 5 books, but it happened right before 9/11. He was actually finishing up his final edits of the book, and in his book, a group of terrorists had hijacked a plane and used the plane as a weapon to try and assassinate the president of the United States. And he was writing this book and his final edits and heard on the news and walked over to the TV and saw planes flying into the 2 towers. So his editor was like, we can't publish these books, not now, but there's no way we can publish them. And then like 6 months later, they're like, yeah, we should publish them. And you need to tell your story that this is what you're doing. And so from that point on, people became really interested in him because he has this knack of being able to take what he knows and what he knows of Scripture and then describe like, this is how it might work. I've read all this stuff. What it could look like politically. So he writes these political thrillers, and they're all fictions, and it's really fascinating. And
he wrote a book that then it was a couple of books after that which a guy gets assassinated, and the book came out, and then the Palestinian leader. Yeah, his name got assassinated.
Yeah,
So it's happened multiple times.
Yeah, it's not just like it wasn't just like 9/11. He's done it several times. He's done it several times where he's in tune enough to what's going on in politics to be able to predict things that could happen in the fallout of them.
Like how it could look.
And the books are like, they're like page turner. Some of you are like, I can't.
They're so good.
They're so good.
So good. Yeah.
And he's got, I don't know.
Like what?
He's got
like 13 of them? Or
13 to 14 books.
But he also.
What do you start with?
Joel, well, you start with The Last Jihad.
Series.
But then he's got you could start anywhere. You could start with his new series. He usually writes in books of 3. The Last Jihad series is a book of 5, or a series of 5. And I read all of it. It was really good.
But he also has a book. I haven't read any of them. Except for I've read his research basically.
Yeah, he's done some
he
nonfiction
published a book. And so if you don't have like a lot of time or you don't want to read the fiction side, he goes into all of his research as to kind of all of his biblical research as to kind of how, and his kind of regional research, things about, because there were certain things that like, there's certain things about like Israel would discover natural gas. Well, that was prophetically told, not that it said they'll discover natural gas, but there was a prophecy that was talking about these types of things, and he begins to link these things kind of for you. It's called the Ezekiel option. What is that one called?
Oh, the Ezekiel option is
Do you know which
part
one
of
I'm
the
talking
Jihad
about?
series, but oh no,
And I
no,
read
that's a
that
different
one,
series.
and it was really that
No,
one.
but
was,
it's
what
the
is that?
Revolution.
No.
No, we have it on our. It's a nonfiction. It's one of the few
it's
nonfiction.
His only nonfiction, but it's kind of his notes.
Huh?
Was it Inside the Revolution?
Inside the
Or
Revolution.
Center?
No.
That's it. You got it, Alex. You got
No. Let me.
Yeah,
I'll
it
find
is.
it. Just a sec. It's not. That's not the name of it.
Okay,
I will find it.
Becky's gonna find it.
I don't want to be here for that.
But anyway, it's actually really interesting because in the books he'll actually have his characters read some of the passages that he's done the research on and have them like try and make connections to it and that kind of thing. And he's just really good at weaving it in and out. So, and a lot of his characters are not believers. They're not Christians, and then there's like these circumstances that they become believers. It's just really interesting.
Epicenter.
Epicenter. That's right.
That's
You're
what
wrong.
it is.
You're wrong, Alex. But Inside the Revolution
I
is.
said Epicenter. I just two options.
Okay,
I
Alex
said
is
Inside
right.
the Revolution or Epicenter. I
Oh,
haven't
sorry,
read
you
those
didn't
books.
hear
I
you
just
say
looked at the
epicenter, so
titles.
you didn't get the star for that one.
I never said Epicenter. I was wrong.
No star.
So. Anyway.
But
Okay.
I think that he's a person that we go to for all our like Middle East news.
He lives in Jerusalem.
He
yeah.
lives in Jerusalem now. They've migrated back. So he was an American Jew. His parents were immigrants over here, I think.
They
or
were
his
immigrants from
grandparents.
because his parents were Russian Jews
They got out
And they
literally
got
out
out.
on one of the last boats before
Hitler.
before everything closed
And
down.
he wrote a really interesting book too. What's it called? It's on the Holocaust.
The Auschwitz.
The Auschwitz
It's about
escape.
the two guys that escaped.
That's a historical novel based on real events, and it's
Hard.
a hard book to read because he gives like realistic descriptions of what these prisoners were going through in Auschwitz and how they had to and how they were trying to escape to let the world know what was going on because the world didn't really know what was going on. So, but that's a single novel that is really good too. So, but not one, again, it's page turner, but it's hard. So,
I just think he's helpful because it is hard to take like this stuff and like import it
yeah.
and overlay it on, okay, well, what am I even looking for, right? I mean, it's so much easier when you have the history to go back and say, well, that's Antiochus III,
Yeah.
even though that's not that easy. But I mean, to go back and be able to say that. And
Well,
so,
to be able to personalize it with
Yeah.
like you get connected to a character and they, so it's really a nice way to kind of learn some things about scripture. So. All right, well, let's go ahead and pray, and then we'll.
And he's not a lunatic.
He's not a loony bin.
And there's some real lunatics.
There are some loonies out there on this kind of stuff. So, well, Lord, we're just grateful that all of us could be here tonight, and we're grateful that you have given us your word, and there's details in your word, and we don't understand them all. But Lord, I just ask that you would perk our hearts and our minds and our ears to your heart and your will and your in your mind what you are concerned with, Lord, and that we would be interested in that, and that we would pursue you in those ways, Lord. So thank you once again, and we look forward to learning more about you through your Spirit and the action of your Spirit. In your name, amen. Okay, so next week will be it. That'll be the end of Daniel.
It will be?
We're going to do Ephesians, yeah.
So you're going to do all the way through 12?
Oh yeah, 12 is only 13 verses. So,
Oh,
yeah. So,
okay.
so Rachel, why are you here? Is exactly right. So,
Tomorrow's my grandma's birthday.
okay.
She's turning 80.
So.
And my work would give me this entire week off.